te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere ake nei. An essay to the Education Minister, secondary principals say COVID and flu disruptions are pushing schools to a tipping point. Students are anxious about achieving NCEA and some are drifting away from education for good. A stranger abduction, someone who knew the area well. Police reveal their working theory for who killed Ashburton teenager Kirsty Bentley and offer a $100,000 reward for a conviction. Wild weather means reduced speed on Auckland's Harbour Bridge and lights out for Waitangi and Paihia. And Air New Zealand clears most of its school holiday backlog, just 100 delayed passengers still to deliver out of 600 cancelled flights.
RNZ News at 5. Ahi Marie, I'm Evie Ashton. Secondary principals have united to make an unprecedented call for help to the government. In a letter obtained by RNZ, the leaders of 10 regional principals associations said schools were at or near breaking point because of the stress of ongoing staff and student absences. Our education correspondent, John Gerritsen, reports.
The letter implores the government to reveal as soon as possible how it will help teenagers pass NCEA this year. Principals told RNZ some students have given up hope of catching up on the work they've missed, and many more than usual are seeking help for depression and anxiety. They also warned that the most vulnerable communities are worst affected. The Education Ministry and Qualifications Authority have told principals they're trying to find a solution that is fair and equitable.
COVID-19 has reached an unwelcome milestone, with the 16 deaths reported today, taking the number of people who've died with the virus to over 2,000. The total number of deaths is now 2,006. It's also the first time since the end of March that more than 800 people have been hospitalised with the virus. The figures show 836 people are in hospital, 27 of whom are in ICU or HDU. Green Party MP Chloe Swarbrick has ruled herself out of contention for the party's co-leadership. James Shaw was ousted as a co-leader during the party's online AGM over the weekend by a minority of Green Party delegates. 32 out of 107 delegates voted to vacate his position, more than the 25% threshold necessary under the Greens rules. Jake McKee reports.
In a Facebook post this afternoon, Chloe Swarbrick thanked people for expressing confidence in her, but she says she won't be contesting the co-leadership. Ms Swarbrick says what happened at the AGM was unprecedented and it's now time for all Green MPs to reflect and listen. She also says she won't endorse any candidates. Fellow Green MPs Eugenie Sage and Golriz Garaman have also ruled themselves out of contention. However, James Shaw is running to retain his co-leadership position.
The detective in charge of the unsolved murder of a Canterbury teenager says her killer is likely to be a stranger who knew the area well. The police are offering a $100,000 reward for information about the murder of 15-year-old Kirsty Bentley. She went missing from her Ashburton home on New Year's Eve in 1998. Her body was found near Rakaya Gorge 18 days later. Detective Inspector Greg Merton says someone knows the truth.
Well, my personal view is that it was probably a stranger-type abduction, someone who most likely is very familiar with the area around where Kirsty lived in the Riverbank area, rather than a person passing through, that they're also very familiar with that Rakaya Gorge area. Probably a very good chance that they were involved with cannabis growing or cannabis usage.
The reward will be offered for 6 months. A Bay of Islands resident says it's been a wild day of weather in the upper North Island. Paihia and Waitangi spent much of the day in the dark in a power cut affecting more than 1,700 properties. Power's mostly been restored now to Paihia and Waitangi. Bay of Islands lodge owner Andy Larson says he'd put a load of washing in when the lights went out.
The last couple of days it's been quite wet, but the wind really picked up. It really had a sort of a real bite to it today, more sort of storm-like than it's been. Heavy winds, things blowing around.
Hundreds of customers are still without power in the far north. Northland Civil Defence is warning locals of potential flooding on roads. It says roads near the east coast are particularly risky with high tide at 5:30 to 6 this evening. Civil Defence says closures aren't guaranteed, but drivers should be prepared. And a stretch of State Highway 25 in Coromandel is closed this evening due to dangerous conditions. The highway north of Coromandel town was down to one lane earlier due to a slip. Wakakotahi says it'll reassess the road tomorrow morning. There's also flooding between Tairua and Whitianga, with some parts of the roading network down to one lane, and more closures are likely. To sport, and the New Zealand captain, Kane Williamson, has been named in his first Black Caps limited overs squad since last year's T20 World Cup. Williamson, who played his last T20 match in the World Cup final loss to Australia in November, will lead identical T20 and one-day squads in 3 T20s and 3 one-days in the West Indies. He'll be joined by Trent Bolts, Tim Southee and batter Devon Conway, all of whom were rested for games against Ireland, Scotland and the Netherlands following the Test series loss to England. It'll be the Black Caps' first tour of the Caribbean in 8 years and part of their build-up for the T20 World Cup in Australia in October. Coach Gary Stead says with one-day World Cup qualification also on the line, they've had to select a blend of both squads.
I don't ever know if you've ever got absolutely the strongest team out there, but I still think there's a lot of talent in this team, and it's an exciting blend of experienced players, but then also some new players like Finn Allen, like Michael Bracewell, that are entering our side that are very, very early in their career.
The head of the Commonwealth Games Federation, New Zealander Katie Sadlier, says countries where it's legal to be gay are less likely to host the Commonwealth Games. Countries where it's illegal to be gay are less likely to host the Commonwealth Games in the future. More than half of the 54 countries competing in Birmingham 2022 have laws against same-sex relationships. LGBT plus athletes will be able to wave the rainbow flag on the podium for the first time at this week's Birmingham Games. And Scott McLaughlin has finished third and fellow New Zealander Scott Dixon fourth in the second race of the IndyCar doubleheader in Iowa. Dixon's now tied for third in the championship standings with McLaughlin seventh. That's the news.
The Green Party's James Shaw will fight to stay at the top.
Are you going to be throwing your pot in the ring?
Yes, I am, because I'm not done. I mean, the climate crisis is unabated.
Jacinda Ardern backs him.
I've already said and been very clear, I hold confidence in Minister Shaw. I have every intention that he retains his portfolios.
But for others, it's about policy rather than the person.
But for me, the issue isn't really James or who is the leader. The issue is how strong are these people going to be?
Politics, people and personalities. Morning reports weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. For Northland, Auckland, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty, rain with heavy falls, easing to showers tomorrow morning. Northeast gales today, severe in exposed parts of Northland and Auckland. From Waikato to Taranaki, including the Central High Country. Rain possibly heavy, easing to a few showers tomorrow morning. Rains returning tomorrow evening. From Gisborne to Wairarapa, also from Whanganui to Wellington. Periods of rain, heavy at times about Gisborne, clearing tomorrow apart from a few showers in the west. Bulla, Nelson and Marlborough, periods of rain, heavy at times. Canterbury and eastern Otago, drizzle turning to rain today with heavy falls tomorrow. Snow down to 600 metres for a time. For the remainder of Otago and for Southland, clouds increasing, coastal showers today, scattered rain tomorrow. Westland and Fiordland, scattered rain in Westland, spreading elsewhere tomorrow. And for Re Kohu, the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, the odd shower and then rain tomorrow night. It's coming up to 8 minutes past 5. I'll update you with the latest headlines and any traffic news at about 20 past 5.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint i tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Secondary principals have united to make an unprecedented call for help as classes reopen for the third school term. In a letter obtained by RNZ, the leaders of 10 regional principals associations say schools are at or near breaking point because of the stress of ongoing staff and student absences. They say the government must say as soon as possible how it will help students pass NCEA this year. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
The principals say the combination of COVID and influenza has caused more disruption to learning than they've ever seen before. In the past 2 terms, schools have had to cancel classes for lack of teachers, and their absences and those of students have made learning especially difficult. One of the signatories to the letter, Karen Brinsden from the county's Manukau Secondary Principals Association, told RNZ some teens are giving up hope.
Students that are feeling that they're too far behind to catch up or even get on top of their studies, the financial pressures, well-being of students is of great concern. There's high numbers of students being supported by counsellors for anxiety and depression.
Kevin Carter from the Greater Wellington Principals Association says half the students at his school, Rongotai College, have had COVID already this year, and a further 20 to 30% have had to isolate because of household contacts.
We've had teachers absent with COVID and in isolation. And then in the last term, of course, we had the advent of influenza where we had almost 20% of our students away on some days. So there's been a huge level of disruption in schools, and we want some clarity around what's going to happen.
He says one option would be to lower the number of credits students must achieve to get an NCEA certificate. But whatever the Qualifications Authority does, it needs to do it soon.
There just needs to be some clarity, and for it to happen early and not to be a prolonged discussion about what relief is going to be on the table.
Phil Holstein from the Canterbury and West Coast Principals Association says unlike previous years, there have been no lockdowns affecting some regions more than others. He says that will make it harder to figure out which schools need the most help and how to provide it fairly.
So therefore, what NZQA and the Ministry have a look at is how we can actually make these adjustments. That has to look differently as well. And so far, I understand it's been hard to determine what that looks like.
Greg Pearce from the Auckland Secondary Principals Association says if the government doesn't act, it's the most vulnerable students who will suffer.
I think I'm thinking more of our more vulnerable communities within the country, and I think it's disproportional the effect this could have on them. If nothing was changed and it's business as usual, when we know it hasn't been business as usual.
The association sent their letter last week, and this morning the Qualifications Authority and Education Ministry emailed principals saying they would do something and it's a high priority. They say any solution has to match the level of disruption, recognise learning that has actually occurred, and not add to teachers' workloads.
So on the first day of term, we dialed up 3 schools to take the mood of the classroom.
Kia ora, I'm Tim Grocott. I'm the headmaster at Shirley Boys High School.
Tell me about your staffing levels today. First day of term, have you got a full contingent?
What have we got away? We've got four staff away today of a staff of around about 120.
I know the Principals Association from your neck of the woods is one of those who have put their names to this letter to the Minister of Education, concerned that member schools are edging toward a tipping point and that you've been really stretched with face-to-face learning, and you're concerned about your students, that some of them might move away from school, give up the ghost. Do you share those concerns?
Yeah, I do. I think... While our attendance rates have remained relatively high, our engagement of our young men at our school has probably not been as high. I think that we are finding less engagement, lower achievement. We're finding that a number of our boys are sort of coming to school, but not a lot is getting done, and there is quite a bit of anxiety in and around the community. What we're finding is that we've got a lot of long-term non-attendance, and that's a real worry.
Yeah, so you're worried that you'll lose them permanently to education?
I think so, and a number of them are quite young. A number of them will be around 14, 15 years of age is one of our challenges, particularly the ones who are not coming because there's some mental health or anxiety. Those sort of issues are happening, not for our older students, but for probably our boys around 14, 15 years of age.
What do you need to turn that round, Tim?
There certainly needs to be a greater understanding of the impact of non-attendance. And I know that we hear lots of good stories and lots of good messages from the ministry and from the government, but we actually need money so that we can have a sustained, prolonged, over a period of time, initiative to improve attendance. I had a conversation with someone from the Ministry of Education at the end of last term because we wanted to try and do some work with attendance. The $40 million that's been available from the government to address attendance, we asked how we could get our hands on some of that. What could we actually do? Can we employ a staff member to actually go out and actually work with families and work with whānau, engage with them? A response was, well, you could run a pilot or a project for 10 weeks and get something going, and that's how you could access some funding to do that. Well, that's nice for 10 weeks, but that's not good enough. This needs to be over a period of years. The impact of COVID, I think, on our young people and on our schools is not going to be resolved in 10 weeks. It's going to take 10 years to recover from the challenges we've had over the last 3 years. I've been a principal for only 3 years, but I've been in teaching for 20-odd years, and I don't think I've ever seen teaching staff as tired and as worn out as they were at the end of last term. And it's not going to get any easier. So our teachers need to keep working and working hard, but it's going to be hard to get some of our boys over the line.
Tim, I'm not making light of this when I say it, but you're a COVID principal then, if you've been a principal for 3 years.
I am a COVID principal, you're dead right. I started my principalship, and I think after 6 weeks I was running the school from my lounge. So it sort of was a different experience.
Kia ora, Lisa. Nice to talk to you again.
That's Malcolm Milner, principal of Balmoral School. It's primary and intermediate.
We've got 3 staff down with COVID, so we've got relievers in for them. So, yeah, we're back into it.
Tell me, what do you reckon, Malcolm, are going to be your biggest challenges this term?
Yeah, I think it's that being able to continually to staff the classroom and all the extra things we do, like the sports practices, the music events, those sorts of things. They're going to be a struggle to provide those because you need everyone on deck to do the extras. So that's going to be a pressure point again.
What's the reliever budget looking like?
No, look, we've spent quite a lot of money on reliever budget, but we are getting money back from the ministry. I would just like to think they could make it a little bit easier and not have to fill out all this form filling to make it easier for us. That's a pain. That is a problem.
My name's Ivan Davis. I'm the principal at Western Springs College, a co-educational school of about 1,730 students.
That's a lot of students. Are most of them there today? And what about the teachers?
We are stubbornly at around about 82-83% attendance, all towards the end of last term and again this term. I wondered how much the impact of today's appalling weather would have on attendance, but we seem to be in this pattern of around about 82-83% at this stage. For our staff, we have 13 staff away today. Out of a teaching staff of 130 teachers, that's a 10% load, which is what we'd expect in any winter term, what with the combination of illness and sickness and flu and colds and all that sort of thing.
What are classes looking at? Have you brought in relievers or how are you managing?
That's the biggest challenge for all schools, I think, is getting hold of relievers. They're a scarce commodity. So the relievers we have got cover our classes. Myself and other members of the senior leadership team are jumping in to help as well.
Ivan, how are you feeling going into term 3? Because I know a letter has gone to the Minister suggesting that, well, the schools are at tipping point. Well, they're edging towards a tipping point, it says, and it's signed by the Auckland Secondary Schools Principals Association. Yeah. So, your thoughts?
I mean, the worry that I have is the freight train of qualifications sort of coming down the track towards us, and the anxiety that creates amongst students and parents. And NZQA have sent out this a soothing letter sort of saying, hey, look, we're on this same page with you, we're thinking about this.
Ivan, are you soothed by that letter then?
I am, because I know work is being done.
What do you think you may need this term?
A whole bunch of extra relievers would be nice.
You say that laughing, but you're not joking, are you, Ivan?
I know we're not going to be able to magic them up. I guess the other thing is what we've just been talking about, that reassurance as soon as possible that there'll be some amelioration in relation to credit requirements for NCEA, particularly for our exiting students, our Year 13 students.
And that was 3 principals on day 1 of term 3. The Associate Education Minister, Jan Tinetti, says she will write back to the principals and will meet them if they want that. She says teachers are doing an extraordinary job. The government is listening to them and it is trying to find ways to lighten their workload and support students doing NCEA this year. It is almost 5:20. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. The Upper North Island has taken a pounding today with heavy rain and wild winds enough to tip trucks and knock out power. The Harbour Bridge has been operating low speed restrictions, roads have flooded and some schools were forced to keep the gates closed. And it's not over yet. Met Service says there could be winds up to 110 kilometres an hour in Auckland and Northland tonight. Paihia and Waitangi spent most of the day in the dark and a power cut affecting more than 1,700 properties. Sam Ollie visited some of those affected.
Rain on the roof and wind against the windows, but no hot water, no flushing toilets, no stoves, oven or microwave, and certainly no heat pump. Bay of Islands residents rugged up and got camping stoves and torches to wait out the miserable day. Almost every business on the main street was closed, except the pharmacy that kept up lifeline services in the dark and one sushi shop using a backup generator and cash. Countdown Waitangi had to shut when power was lost and couldn't open again until 3 this afternoon. Bay of Islands lodge owner Andy Larson among the business leaders disrupted.
Had a load of washing in there and then suddenly everything stopped and lights went out and so we thought, there goes the power cut.
The outage started around 9 and power was restored to his street just before 2 this afternoon. It went on longer than Mr Larson expected, but he was understanding when he looked outside.
The last couple of days it's been quite wet, but the wind really picked up. It really had a sort of a real bite to it today, more sort of storm-like than it's been. Heavy winds, things blowing around.
The cut caused a nervous wait for Donna Smith down the street at Sandpit Pool Room and Bar.
Coming down here, trying to see what we can do, check stock, because obviously all the fridges go off as well.
But the backup power worked and the general supply was restored in time for her to open at 5.
Just like, oh, thank God. I was just trying to work away in the dark, sort of filling up my shelves, and all of a sudden they all just come back on, so it was absolutely fantastic.
Lines company Top Energy says the cut was caused by a damaged power pole in an isolated area. Palmapuria School, south of Kaitaia, lost power in a different cut, affecting 240 properties this morning. Principal Cheryl Bamber waited outside her school to turn parents away when staff couldn't reach them.
It's pretty hard to phone a lot of our parents because we live in rural pockets that have a little to no connectivity, and especially in bad weather like this, it's pretty much zero.
The day off school came as a surprise to Tamariki after 2 weeks of holidays.
Today was day 1 of term 3, so it was a little bit of a shock to to not actually be open. But like I say, the majority of our whānau were grateful for the early 7 o'clock heads up.
Top Energy is now fixing other outages south of Coopers Beach that affected 350 properties this afternoon.
It's 23 minutes past 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And Homai o Whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Really keen to hear from you if you're a student trying to get through NCEA or the parent of a student. How are you finding it? The pressure of not being in the class if you have been sick. A lot of you under stress, we know. Let us know your thoughts. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email. The address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time to get to the headlines now. Ko iwi anō tēnei.
Kia ora, Lisa. A group of secondary principals says schools are at breaking point. In a letter obtained by RNZ, the leaders of 10 regional principals associations have told the government that schools were suffering because of the stress of ongoing staff and student absences. Green Party MP Chloe Swarbrick has ruled herself out of contention for the party's co-leadership. James Shaw was earlier ousted as co-leader by a minority of Green Party delegates, but he'll stand again. The police have doubled the reward money for information on the unsolved murder of Canterbury teenager Kirsty Bentley. She went missing from her Ashburton home on New Year's Eve 1998 when she failed to return from walking her dog. Her body was found near Dakaya Gorge 18 days later. The police are now offering a $100,000 reward. 2,006 people have now died with the COVID-19 virus. 16 deaths were reported today. It's also the first time since the end of March that more than 800 people have been hospitalised with the virus. Christchurch Hospital has confirmed it has 169 COVID-19 patients today, its highest number since the pandemic began. Last week, the hospital tightened its visitor restrictions amid surging cases, mandating surgical masks, reducing visitor hours and refusing entry to under-16s unless they have an exemption. Widespread parts of the country are on alert for the impact of more bad weather. A stretch of State Highway 25 in Coromandel is closed this evening due to dangerous conditions. The highway north of Coromandel town was down to one lane earlier due to a slip. There's also flooding between Taidua and Whitianga, with some parts of the roading network down to one lane and more closures likely. And Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago are also on alert for forecast rain tonight, which could cause problems. Those are the headlines, and a little bit of traffic for the rest of the country. The traffic that I have is in Wellington at Ngaudanga Interchange. That's now clear after a police incident, but there may be delays. And for Nelson, Main Road at Stoke is now closed. State Highway 6 is open, but with delays because that's the detour. If you have any other traffic news and you can safely send it through to us, please send it through to 2101. Otherwise, I'll be back with more news and traffic at about 5:40.
Ngā mihi, Evie, and just an update on some of that traffic. Police are urging motorists in Northland to avoid all non-essential travel. There's been a slip on State Highway 11 near Lemons Hill between Kawakawa and Paihia, and that's blocked both lanes. There's surface flooding and rising tides. They've also affected several roads and bridges in the area. And they say low cloud is also limiting visibility on State Highway 1 at the Brindewin Hills. And police are warning a significant number of roads will continue to be affected by rain in the coming high tide. So motorists are asked to stay home if they don't need to travel. Newmarket locals are fuming at Destiny Church leader Brian Tamaki, saying Saturday's protest left people cut off from sick family and counting yet more losses. Several hundred demonstrators walked onto the motorway on Saturday in a so-called Freedom March. It made life more miserable for recovering Newmarket businesses as well as those with unwell family at nearby Auckland Hospital. Meanwhile, Mr Tamaki's wife, Hannah, is making light of the chaos. Here's our reporter Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Monroe.
Newmarket businesses counting the cost of yet another ruined weekend of trading. But this time it's not COVID nor a lockdown. It's Brian Tamaki and his band of supporters, the so-called Freedom and Rights Coalition, causing chaos, blocking would-be customers.
We were incredibly frustrated. By all means, protest, and it's part of our democratic right, and I've protested in my life 100%. But actually, when you're fundamentally hurting small business owners, the Beehive doesn't care about this. It doesn't affect the Beehive one iota. It affects people who are opening their stores and their cafes and bars and restaurants on the streets on a Saturday, and they had really bad trade because of it.
Newmarket Business Association Chief Executive Mark Knopf-Thomas left fuming, saying the protests had little impact, aside from screwing over the locals.
It's pissed a lot of people off. The only impact it's going to have is polarise New Zealand further. So a lot of people will understand the issues people are protesting about. We all do. We can see there are parts of it we can agree with. But the way of doing it, that is not the way to do it, to hurt small business owners. It's not fair.
And it's not just struggling retailers who have had a gutsful. As we stand on the streets of Newmarket, another local tells us the Freedom and Rights Coalition's march down the motorway made a tough day for her family even harder.
I felt they went too far. They were disruptive to genuine members of the public. I was trying to get to Auckland Hospital and was severely disrupted with a close member of our family in Auckland Hospital So, yeah, I wasn't happy at all.
She has little sympathy for the protesters when they caused further upheaval for families like hers.
It impacted us personally, and I'm not happy with the protesters at all. Yes, people have a right to protest, but they cannot inhibit others who are going about their right to have ability to carry on with their daily lives as well.
Her frustrations shared by every pedestrian who stopped to speak to Checkpoint, not one supportive of Saturday's action led by Mr Tamaki.
And he's got them by the short and curlies. They can't think for themselves and they follow him mindlessly in breaking the law.
I think the police just helped them because they just allowed them to just do what and get on with it. That's what I feel.
Even those who back the protesters' sentiments saying they went too far.
Agreed with some of the sentiments of the protests, but they went too far blocking the motorway. If they protested quietly somewhere else, it would have been better.
But safe to say Auckland Mayor Phil Goff's a little less understanding.
The Freedom and Rights Coalition, they call themselves, but what about the freedom and rights of other people who were out there on Saturday trying to get about their day-to-day business when this group of people, as foreshadowed the day before, were creating, in their own words, motorway mayhem?
Mr Goff challenging Mr Tamaki to put his money where his mouth is.
If Mr Tamaki has a strong political viewpoint, which he clearly has, then he should run for Parliament. He should put his name out there and see how much support he gets. I would suspect very little, as indeed his partner did when she ran for office last year.
Checkpoint made multiple attempts to get a response from the Freedom and Rights Coalition, but received nothing back. But Hannah Tamaki used Sunday's Destiny Church sermon as an opportunity to address the elephant in the room.
I was walking outside, so I pressed the button and it was just under, I think 1 hour, just under 1 hour 40. And my watch told me I was walking outside. So I was walking outside yesterday and I had a nice walk outside and I saw a whole lot of people that I knew. And I saw cars. I've never been that close to that many cars at one time. And some of them were going and some were doing other fingers and some of them were waving and some of them were tooting. And I thought, why are you doing that? I'm only out for a walk. I'm not hurting anybody.
And later, it was the turn of the self-styled bishop himself.
See, they're always watching the media. They send all the stuff I do to the police so they can arrest me. Who does that? They only do that in Colombia and in Ethiopia. Media sends stuff, recordings to the police and to the Crown lawyers to get me. That's really bad stuff. But Kiwis are still driving out there giving us the fingers.
Back in Newmarket, there's a sense of irony that isn't lost on Mark Knopf-Thomas, a protester crying the state of the country, making life even harder for battling business owners.
As a retail town centre, we are at the forefront of a lot of these issues. We understand there is pain. However, the rest of the world isn't rosy either. The world right now is in a really bad space. New Zealand has got to work through this, and by doing it, we can together work through a solution with our government in a possible, logical way, not through protesting and blocking motorways. It's not cool at all.
As for Brian Tamaki calling his critics angry, self-entitled dickheads, Mr Knopf-Thomas leaves us with this on behalf of Newmarket's businesses.
I think the only person entitled in this situation is Brian Tamaki.
And if you were listening to that on radio, the video from that story from our Nix will be on our webpage. It is 29 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. And it's time for the business news now. Ko taku hoa e nāne, ko Giles Beckford, who's joining us live from Wellington. Talk to me about Z Energy. They're pulling the plug on making biofuels. Giles, what's the deal?
Kia ora to you, Lisa. Well, they actually were just experimenting a few years ago. When the pandemic hit, they put the thing in mothballs. All the indications were that it wasn't going to be economic, and they said as much over the past couple of years, but they finally sort of given it the last rites today, saying we're not going to revive it, it's not economic. And it's interesting to see the biofuel, the raw material they were using for biofuel was tallow, which is basically rendered down animal fat. Now, as Mike Bennett from Z said to me earlier today, he was saying, New Zealand's the Saudi Arabia of tallow, which I'm not sure that's necessarily an international title we'd like to brandish around. But anyway, we have a lot of it because of our agricultural economy. But what's been going on in recent years is that Asian producers have been coming into this country, buying up New Zealand tallow at higher prices than we can, or local producers or local users can afford. So essentially, we've been priced out of the market for our own raw material. It's all gone offshore, or large amounts of it go offshore, to be refined into biofuels, which we in due course will be buying back into the country. And remembering that the government has a biofuels mandate which will come into operation next year. It's still being finalised, but essentially this will require fuel wholesalers to offer increasing amounts of biofuel to replace fossil fuels. It's all part of the climate change carbon targets that we have. And we're going to be fulfilling this by buying our own processed tallow back in the form of biodiesel or other biofuels from overseas suppliers. So it's a similar situation, we might say, to Genesis, which is also looking at using wood-based biofuels for its Huntly power station to replace coal. Once again, we don't have a local version of it. We can see bits of New Zealand wood going offshore, possibly in the end being processed overseas, which we'll buy back to replace coal and cut those carbon emissions. So once again, New Zealand's inability either to get scale or to make the most of some of our raw materials coming back to bite us in our economic backside.
Yeah, let's talk about Sealord. This is an interesting one. So that's the big fishing company. They say they're facing a loss of 5 to 7 million in one part of its operation because of a labour shortage. And I know its own CEO was on the, factory floor at one point.
In fact, he'd just come back from holiday and he was going back onto the floor this morning. Essentially, they're saying they've got a quarter of the workforce that they needed to be able to process the hoki. There's an 18 to 20 week season in which hoki is brought in, principally into Nelson, but other factories around the country. They've just not been able to get the labour. They've tried where they can. They needed 450 or thereabouts workers. They basically got somewhere around just over 100. They've had to be a little bit innovative, so they've been offering, for instance, shifts during school hours so that parents can drop off the kids at school, come and do a shift, and then go away and pick up the kids after school. They've got their office workers coming in down onto the shop floor as well and doing the processing. One of the things that particularly, I think, riled Sealord, or they weren't too vituperative about it, shall we say, but they said there were all these Pacific Island workers who'd been here, seasonal workers, who'd been in the horticultural industry, who still had time left on their visas and could have been moved from horticulture into fish processing. Immigration authorities, for one reason or other, weren't able to make that happen, weren't willing to make that happen. And so, once again, the company is bearing the cost. And it's not just Sealords. One has to assume that other fishing companies and a lot of other primary industries that need the labour, they're suffering the same way. It'll be interesting to see the financial costs that these companies have borne when we start to get the earnings reports from companies in the next 3 weeks or so. But if it's $5 to $7 million for Sealord in one part of their operation, then you've got to figure that there are many millions of dollars elsewhere in other companies that will come to the bottom line of their accounts.
And Josh, shall we take a dash around the markets, please?
Oh, let's have a stroll rather than a dash. This time, the share market started with a hint of positivity, didn't last, down 65 points, just under 0.2%, sitting just below the 11,200 level. New Zealand dollar is 63.2 US cents, 90.2 Australian, 52 British pence. All eyes on the markets on the Federal Reserve meeting later in the week. The decision on Thursday, our time, expectations of a 75 basis point rise in their benchmark rate.
Thank you, Giles. Giles Beckford joining us there live from Wellington. The battle for the soul of the Green Party is underway, with James Shaw vowing he will fight to take back the co-leadership. It's not yet clear who, if anyone, he will face off against for the role. The MP with the best chance to beat him, Chloe Swarbrick, has ruled herself out. Other contenders are so far keeping their powder dry, but one MP says she is considering her options. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
He may have been knocked down, but James Shaw is not giving up.
My job is not done.
Fighting words after a brutal ouster. James Shaw was blindsided by members over the weekend, ejected from the co-leadership after 30% of delegates effectively declared no confidence. It leaves a vacancy alongside Marama Davidson and triggers another vote to be held within 5 weeks.
I'm not about to walk away from a job that I consider barely half done, right when we're about to get some traction.
Since the weekend, James Shaw has been talking to members, to his family and to MPs. He believes he has the necessary support to take back the job.
I am quietly confident.
But his critics say don't be so sure. Travis Mashesque is one of 32 Green delegates who voted against Mr Shaw's re-election. He says many members want a more radical leader to step up.
James will have a fight on his hands if more than one contender stands up. I think there's going to be a lot of options out there on the table.
No one else has yet put themselves forward to contest the role, but any member in or out of Parliament can do so. James Shaw spoke to his fellow MPs last night, but he won't say what they told him.
You will have to talk to them about what their views are.
So we did. RNZ contacted all the party's sitting MPs to ask whether they'll stand and who they might back. The MP considered the most likely future leader, Chloe Swarbrick, has taken herself out of the running. In a post on Facebook, the Auckland Central MP says she will now respect the process and take time to reflect and listen.
Chloe is an extraordinary political talent. I think she's magic.
Eugenie Sage and Golriz Garaman have also ruled themselves out. Others are keeping quiet. But watch this space. The first-term MP Elizabeth Kirikiri told RNZ she is considering her options and will have more to say tomorrow. The long-time community activist made headlines earlier this year after breaking COVID-19 isolation rules. She has the support of at least one delegate, Nicole Gallick-Legros.
Personally, my hopes and dreams for the party leadership would be Elizabeth Kirikiri. She is a spectacular leader and she has all the skills to take us into the future. But again, that's just my personal view.
Another delegate, though, told RNZ James Shaw remains the best person for the job, and that some of the party's younger members seem unwilling to respect others' opinions. James Shaw says if he wins, he will redouble his efforts.
I am pushing the government as hard as I can to do more, to go further and to go faster than it has so far. I will continue to do that.
Whatever the outcome, he will stay on as Climate Change Minister. Green MPs meet tomorrow morning at Parliament. They'll have plenty to discuss, and then another month or so to mull it over.
It's 20 to 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Oh my o whakaaro, send us your thoughts on anything you've heard on the program tonight. Text us 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or the email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines. Anea Iwi, mina pita pita kōrero.
Thanks, Lisa. Let me get myself organised. Here we are. A group of secondary principals says schools are at breaking point. In a letter obtained by RNZ, the leaders of 10 regional principals associations have told the government that schools were suffering because of the stress of ongoing staff and student absences. Green Party MP Chloe Swarbrick won't stand for party co-leader and won't endorse any candidates. She's today ruled herself out of contention for the party's co-leadership. James Shaw was earlier ousted as a co-leader by a minority of Green Party delegates, but will stand again. The police have doubled the reward money to $100,000 for information on the unsolved murder of Canterbury teenager Kirsty Bentley. She went missing from her Ashburton home on New Year's Eve 1998 when she failed to return from walking her dog. Her body was found near Dakaya Gorge 18 days later. Over 1/5 of the country's COVID hospitalisations are at present in Canterbury. Christchurch Hospital has confirmed it has 169 COVID-19 patients today. There are just over 800 hospitalisations nationwide. Northland Civil Defence is warning locals of potential flooding on roads. It says roads near the east coast are particularly risky, with high tide through to 6 p.m. tonight. Meanwhile, a stretch of State Highway 25 from Coromandel Town to Te Rerenga is closed this evening due to dangerous conditions. There's also flooding between Tairua and Whitianga, and Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago are also on alert for forecast rain. Just a bit more detail on that Northland traffic news. There's been a slip on State Highway 11 near Lemons Hill between Kawakawa and Paihia. That's blocked both lanes. Surface flooding and rising tides have also affected several roads and bridges in the area, and there's low cloud limiting visibility on State Highway 1 at the Brynderwyns. So police are asking you, if you don't have to go out and you live in those areas, please stay home. I shall have the next news and the latest weather for you at 6 o'clock.
Kia ora rā e ho. A stranger abduction, not a drifter, but someone who knew the area very well and was probably involved with cannabis. That's the working theory of the top officer in charge of the Kirsty Bentley murder investigation, a cold case from 1998. And now police are offering a $100,000 reward for information leading to the conviction of the teen's killer. 15-year-old Kirsty was last seen walking her dog on New Year's Eve. The dog was found the next day along with her underwear near the Ashburton River, but her body was discovered by chance two weeks later, more than 50 kilometres away in the Rakaya Gorge. Detective Inspector Greg Merton is hoping the reward will make a difference this time round.
Well, we just never know when someone might come forward. Sometimes relationships change, situations change, and people might have been sitting on the information and haven't felt comfortable or scared or unable to come forward with it. And then, years later, they might be in a completely different position or personal relationship, and they might feel comfortable doing that.
Given everything you know about the case, what do you think happened?
Well, my personal view is that it was probably a stranger-type abduction, someone who most likely is very familiar with the area around where Kirsty lived in the riverbank area, rather than a person passing through, that they're also very familiar with that Rakaya Gorge area, and probably a very good chance that they were involved with cannabis growing or cannabis usage.
Do you say that because of the location and that she was discovered by other cannabis growers, so it would be someone familiar with the area who was maybe involved in the same business, or is there something else?
There is something else, but part of it is the two guys that found her were looking for cannabis. It is not an area where a person unfamiliar with that area would go to. It's quite a specific area, and that's part of the rationale for that thinking.
Detective, what's the something else?
I'm not going to talk about that.
Is it DNA evidence or physical evidence?
No, I won't be talking about that. That's still part of the inquiry, and so, other than saying that it is highly likely that a person involved in cannabis was involved in her murder, that's as far as I'll take that.
Her brother and father were looked at very closely by the police. Have you ruled them out as persons of interest?
We can't rule out anyone until we've actually charged the actual offender with the murder, but my personal view is that it is more likely that it was someone who is a stranger who committed the offence.
In saying that, do you think there is any critical information about Kirsty's death that's gone with her father when he died?
No, I don't think so. The investigation right from the start was very thorough. I mean, literally tens of thousands of man-hours have been put into it, and the file is massive. Really, no stone was left unturned in terms of the investigation, and Sid was looked at closely, and I don't think there's anything else that we could have gleaned from him. He was interviewed a number of times, so yeah, that's where it is, and I'm pretty comfortable.
Yeah, Kirsty's personal items, underwear, her dog, found on or around the walking track at Ashburton River, and her body, as you point out, found a considerable distance away. What is your explanation for what happened there?
Down at the riverbank?
Yeah, so do you believe that that was a staged crime scene for the police benefit, to draw you away from where her body was?
I think it is more likely, and most of those who worked on the investigation think that crime scene was staged. It was not a typical crime scene by any stretch of the imagination. And so, yeah, we do think that's the case. I mean, the reason the body was moved was most likely to try and eliminate any forensic examination to link her to the person who was involved. And the staging of that scene could have been for a number of reasons. We'll never know, but it's very unusual to tie a dog up and for the underwear and shorts to be thrown on a top of a bush. My personal view is that I don't think the attack happened down there and that it happened somewhere else.
So do you think she was taken close to her home, driven to the gorge, and that's where the attack happened?
No. The most likely scenario in my view is that she was taken while she was on the dog walking route and held somewhere, and then her body was taken up to the gorge afterwards.
And that's Detective Inspector Greg Merton. It is 12 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Bags not, say 20 Countdown stores. The supermarkets are ditching plastic bags from the produce department in a sprinkling of stores countrywide. It means shoppers will have to bring their own bags, boxes, buckets, baskets, whatever they like for their fruit and veg. And joining us now is Commercial Director of Fresh Produce, Pieter de Wet. Pieter, why just 20 stores?
Hi, Lisa. Here we wanted to first really just see practically how it works out for our customers. You know, it's quite a significant change, and as soon as we feel, the customers have adapted to that change, we want to roll it out as quickly as possible to the balance of our chain.
Is it that hard? You just bring a basket or a box or something?
I think it shouldn't be that hard, but it is. You know, I think there were some lessons when we moved to paper shopping bags as well. Sometimes people forget their bag, or it takes them a bit of time to just get into a new habit. So it's just about navigating that and finding the best possible solutions for them.
Have you had any pushback when you've been trialling it at the Herne Bay store?
We've had a few questions, but not so much pushback. It was more just around people saying, what are the alternatives? And when we've got a couple of alternatives in store, so you can buy two recyclable bags for $1. And as soon as people see that option, they tend to go for it. But there's also a number of customers who's already, prior to us making this move, already stopped using plastic bags themselves, and they often just carry the product in their basket or in their trolley until they get to the checkout.
How many bags, plastic bags, single-use ones, does this get out of the system, just these 20 stores?
Yeah, so it's a pretty staggering number. These 20 stores will reduce about 5.4 million bags a year. And when we look at our entire chain, you're talking of about 50 million bags a year. So it's quite significant. So
you've still got 45 million single-use bags washing around in the fresh fruit and veg department?
We do, and that's why we want to stop it as quickly as possible. We're hoping to do it, obviously, as within this calendar year, and the legislation goes live middle of next year. So we're hoping to do it significantly ahead of that time.
Yeah, so you're giving customers a heads up that they'll have to work it out before the end of this year, because that's when you plan to move.
If we're confident that customers have adjusted and have adapted, and we find suitable solutions for them, absolutely, as soon as possible.
Hey, what about the rest of the plastic in the produce department, right? Because let's just stick with the produce department. There's plastic all through supermarket products. But, you've got your 3 courgettes, it's on a plastic tray, it's wrapped in a wrapper. You've got cut-up carrots, also in plastic, all the leaves and everything in plastic. What's happening with all of that?
So I think the reality of it is there's a functional role for plastic in certain products. If you talk about salad leaves, is probably a very good example, where the plastic does play a role in terms of protecting the product and keeping it lasting for a bit longer. But where we do use product in that example, we'll make sure it's the best possible outcome from an environmental perspective. So in the main, it would be recyclable plastic that we use in a situation like that.
Thank you for joining us. That's Pieter de Wet, who's the Commercial Director of Fresh Goods from Countdown. School's back and the backlog of stranded passengers at airports around the country is finally clearing, with the last 100 or so people on flights home tonight. Air New Zealand was forced to put on extra flights and bigger planes to clear the logjam caused by a combination of bad weather and crew shortages. I asked the airline's Chief Customer and Sales Officer, Leanne Geraghty, how many flights they'd been forced to cancel during the school holidays.
Cancellations over the holiday period was around 600 flights, and when you consider that we flew over 7,500 flights, that will give you a sense of the number of cancellations across that period.
Still, that's a lot to deal with, isn't it? Was that because of weather or was some related to staff illness?
Yeah, look, it is a number of cancellations to deal with, Lisa, and it is a combination of inclement weather across the country, staff illness, which was 3 times what we anticipated it to be, obviously very high load factors because it's the July school holiday period. So putting those 3 factors together in combination really created the perfect storm.
So the bigger planes that you have put on to try and clear those customers, where were they? Were they just parked up here in New Zealand?
No, they weren't parked up here in New Zealand. The team obviously are working around the clock to rearrange flights and to make sure we're minimising disruption and getting our customers to where they need to be. So they've made some amendments to the network and we've put a 300-seat 787 flying between Auckland and Christchurch return today.
And is that just for today?
Yes, that's right.
So how are you going with staffing levels? Because I know you were wanting to recruit. How many people do you need? In what kind of areas?
Yeah, so at the moment we're looking for another 1,100 people. So there's quite a lot of opportunity for people who might like to join the airline. Essentially, we're looking for 500 cabin crew to come on board by the end of this year, around 250 odd staff across the airports in New Zealand, and then we are looking for around 70 pilots for our turboprop fleet. So, there are a number of vacancies across the business, also vacancies in other areas, in terms of travel consultants. We've hired into our contact centre. So, I would encourage anyone that's interested in joining the airline to touch base and have a look at our careers page.
Leanne, have you called back all the staff that you would want back that were laid off because of COVID?
Yes, we have recalled and brought back 1,000 staff that were with the airline previously. So we have exhausted the return of staff that we would like to return to the airline. And we're continuing to look for additional people to come in and join the business.
What are your call centre staffing levels like? How long are people having to wait? Because that's something that, there's been a few complaints about.
Yeah, no, I'm very aware that there's been a few complaints and we've worked really hard to try and get our customer service level back to where we want it to be and to a standard that we're very proud of. We have employed an additional 230 odd consultants into the contact centre. Some of those consultants are actually still going through training at the moment and so are due to come out into the contact centre and take calls over the coming weeks. But I am pleased, Lisa, to say I had a quick check before speaking with you, and our call wait time this afternoon has been sitting at under 1 hour. So I'm pleased to see that there is some great progress being made in terms of those service wait times.
Leanne, 1 hour, that's quite a lot of time to be hanging on the phone, isn't it?
It is a lot of time, but in the context of what it's been over the past month, it is quite an improvement. Obviously, it's
on
not
what?
where we want it to be.
Can you tell me your average wait time then that it has been in the last month? If you're happy with under an hour?
Not happy with it, Lisa, but my point is that we have made good progress with bringing that wait time down. An hour or under an hour isn't acceptable from our perspective, but it is a huge improvement on what we have had over the past few months, where sometimes our call wait times can be, around the 4 to 5 hour mark on occasion.
What are you aiming for then? If just under an hour is still not good enough, where are you going?
Under 10 minutes, without question.
Leanne Geraghty there from Air New Zealand. It's been a hard road to Hawke's Bay, but the new highway from Manawatu is taking shape. Since slip forced the Manawatu Gorge road shut in 2017, drivers have faced slow, hilly detours. The new 4-lane road will be open in 2024. Reporter Jimmy Allingham and cameraman Angus Drever went to take a look.
18 months into the construction of Te Ahua Turonga Manawatu Tararua Highway, and the lower slopes of the Ruahine Range are getting cut in two as the road wends its way up the hill and over to Hawke's Bay. The $620 million road replaces the Manawatu Gorge Road, which shut in 2017 when slips came down on Anzac weekend. About 250 people are working on site at the moment for the Project Alliance that's made up of Waka Kotahi, designers, construction companies and iwi. The weather today is cold, wet and windy, and it was no more windy than when we were at the highest point on the construction site, which was among the Meridian turbines. The 4-lane road begins with a roundabout at the Ashurst end. It's 100 kilometres the whole way. It crosses the Manawatu River, over the railway and up the hill. Owner interface manager for the Alliance, Grant Cody, says the road takes a steep incline up the hill, similar to Transmission Gully.
Yeah, so very similar to TG, in fact the same grade, so anyone who's driven that will have the same experience here in terms of that gradient.
It's a big improvement on the old State Highway 3 through the Manawatu Gorge, which was slow and windy, as is the alternative route over the Saddle Road. 6,000 vehicles a day are using that at the moment, but they'll soon get the benefits of a 4-lane highway, which is due to open in December 2024.
And you can check out progress in the video. We'll chuck it up on our web page. Let's get to some of your feedback now. A lot of you getting in touch about NCEA. This person says, as the parent of 2 high school students who are unable to attend school since having COVID, that has exacerbated glandular fever. I couldn't agree with this principal more. We need to think outside the box. These kids are not truants. They are stressed and unwell and need empathy and support. Another person says, how about a summer school? How about a summer school? Okay, part-time school, part-time work experience with some remuneration. I've thought that rangatahi would be happy in rest homes where oldies would have time to listen and talk to them. And a teacher's got in touch from Wellington who says, already on day 1 of the new term, I have covered a relief period in addition to my own classes. While my school is fortunate to have a number of reliable relievers, our school relies on the goodwill of staff on a daily basis to cover classes. This teacher, Stephanie, is hoping that the Ministry of Education considers teachers as well as students when deciding on how to respond to the current crisis. It is going to be a long term, long in capital letters, says Stephanie. Ngā mihi with a little sad face emoji. And Leslie from Whangarei says, as a matter of curiosity, what were all these students doing who are now so concerned about passing their exams when they were supposed to be at home during lockdown learning? It sounds like they weren't doing much study, Leslie reckons.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, kia ora tātou, ko iwi Ashton tēnei. A Christchurch principal is worried about the number of young teenagers who aren't turning up for school and who may never come back. In an unprecedented move, secondary principals throughout the country have united to call on the government for help, saying they're at or near breaking point because of the stress of ongoing staff and student absences. Tim Grocott from Shirley Boys High told Checkpoint his school is struggling with the problem of students simply dropping out.
A number of them are quite young. A number of them will be around 14, 15 years of age is one of our challenges, particularly the ones who are not coming because there's some mental health or anxiety.
Tim Grocott says schools aren't getting enough help to try to get students back to school. The Associate Education Minister, Jan Tinetti, says she'll write back to the principals and will meet them if they want that. She says teachers are doing an extraordinary job, the government is listening to them, and it's trying to find ways to lighten their workload and support students doing NCEA this year. More than 1/5 of the country's COVID hospitalisations are at present in Canterbury. Christchurch Hospital has confirmed it has 169 COVID-19 patients today, its highest number since the pandemic began. There are just over 800 hospitalisations nationwide. Last week, the hospital tightened its visitor restrictions amid surging cases. Health New Zealand South Island Interim Director Peter Bramley says the hospital is at 113% occupancy this afternoon. He says nearly 300 staff members are also off sick with the virus. Green Party MP Chloe Swarbrick has ruled herself out of contention for the party's co-leadership. James Shaw was ousted as a co-leader during the party's online AGM over the weekend by a minority of Green Party delegates. 32 out of 107 delegates voted to vacate Shaw's position, more than the 25% threshold necessary under the Greens rules. In a Facebook post this afternoon, Chloe Swarbrick thanked people for expressing confidence in her, but she says she won't be running. Ms Swarbrick says what happened at the AGM was unprecedented and it's now time for all Green MPs to reflect and to listen. She also says she won't endorse any candidates. James Shaw will run in a bid to regain the co-leadership. The police have doubled the reward money for information on Canterbury teenager Kirsty Bentley's killer. She went missing from her Ashburton home on New Year's Eve in 1998 when she failed to return from walking her dog. Her body was found near Rakaya Gorge 18 days later. The police are now offering a $100,000 reward in the cold case. Detective Inspector Greg Merton told Checkpoint that someone knows the truth and they should come forward.
Sometimes relationships change, situations change, and people might have been sitting on the information and haven't felt comfortable or scared or unable to come forward with it. And then, years later, they might be in a completely different position or personal relationship, and they might feel comfortable doing that.
The reward will be offered for 6 months. A North Shore resident is shocked after a suspected racist attack on a Chinese New Zealander at a supermarket at the weekend. The Herald reported the man was told to go back to his country, then kicked and punched in the face. Our reporter Lucy Xia has more.
Michaela Sato is of Chinese descent and lives nearby Albany. Ms Sato says she's upset by the incident which happened near her workplace. She says the unprovoked attack on a Chinese man has put her on the edge and she's now concerned for her parents' safety. Ms Soto says Albany has many new migrants, including young families and elderly people who may struggle to report their experience. The police are investigating whether the incident on Sunday morning was racially motivated.
The judge considering the matter of name suppression for 3 people accused of electoral fraud has reserved his decision. The High Court trial on charges over political donations to both Labour and National has been adjourned till tomorrow. A defendant who tested positive for COVID-19 was unable to attend today, and it's planned they'll attend by video link. People now have another 3 weeks to have their say on the reclassification of stewardship land on the West Coast. Stewardship land is what the Department of Conservation calls land the organisation was allocated when it was formed in 1987, but was not given a specific classification. DOC's Strategic Support Director of Operations, Carl Beckert, says concerns were raised about the timeframe for submissions, so it was extended by 20 working days. People now have until August the 23rd to have their say on the proposed classifications for 504 pieces of land on the West Coast. Air New Zealand is looking to hire more than 1,000 staff as the airline struggles to meet demand. Customer and Sales Officer Leanne Geraghty says a combination of bad weather, staff illness and school holiday demand has created a logjam. She told Checkpoint that even cutting support centre hold times to under an hour is a big achievement.
An hour or under an hour isn't acceptable from our perspective, but it is a huge improvement on what we have had over the past few months, where sometimes our call wait times can be, around the 4 to 5 hour mark on occasion.
Leanne Geraghty says Air New Zealand has boosted its support staff with about 230 new employees. And police are urging Northland drivers to avoid non-essential trips. Emergency services are tending to a slip on State Highway 11, blocking both lanes near Lemons Hill. Meanwhile, flooding and rising tides threaten to disrupt other major roads throughout the evening, and a stretch of State Highway 25 in Coromandel is closed due to dangerous conditions. To sport, and All Blacks coach Ian Foster has hinted other changes could be in store for the side's coaching setup in the wake of the series loss to Ireland. Forwards coach John Plumtree and backs coach Brad Moore have been sacked, with the Crusaders' Jason Ryan taking Plumtree's role. It's been suggested the Blues coach Leon McDonald could also join the team. Foster told Sky Sport he's been tasked with getting fresh ideas from outside the current coaching group.
We've got a clear mandate that there's a strong belief in the direction we're going, but there's a feel that we actually need to get a couple of new voices in there and make some changes to get the gains that we really want to get.
Foster says he'll look after the backs in the short term. The All Blacks are in camp in Wellington and head to South Africa on Friday for 2 tests against the Springboks. After 14 years playing overseas, experienced Football Ferns midfielder Betsy Hassett is heading home, signing with the Wellington Phoenix for the upcoming A-League season. Hassett is New Zealand's 4th most capped international footballer, having played 132 internationals, and has played for Manchester City, Werder Bremen and Ajax. And former Los Angeles Lakers basketballer Slava Medvedenko is selling his 2 NBA championship rings to raise money for the war effort in his native Ukraine. Medvedenko won the NBA championship in 2001 and 2002, playing alongside Kobe Bryant and Shaquille O'Neal, and the rings are expected to raise at least $150,000. That's the news.
I'm Catherine Ryan. On 9 to noon tomorrow, concerned the government is failing to engage with Māori over the use of images and the expansion of digital identity tech. While wildfires burn in California, we go to America's largest national park, Yellowstone, in Montana, where flooding is triggering a natural reset. Kiwi author and animator Chrissy Metch on her new book and an unusual Netflix project, and the incredible Pororoa violist who's off to Harvard on a full scholarship. Join me on 9 to noon on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're back with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. For Northland, Auckland, Coromandel and the Bay of Plenty, rain with heavy falls, easing to showers tomorrow morning, northeast gales today, severe in exposed parts of Northland and Auckland. From Waikato to Taranaki, including the Central High Country, rain possibly heavy, easing to a few showers tomorrow morning, rains returning tomorrow evening. From Gisborne to Wairarapa, also from Whanganui to Wellington, periods of rain, heavy at times about Gisborne, clearing tomorrow, apart from a few showers in the west. Bulla, Nelson and Marlborough, periods of rain, heavy at times. Canterbury and Eastern Otago, drizzle turning to rain today with heavy falls tomorrow, snow to 600 metres for a time. For the remainder of Otago and Southland, clouds increasing, coastal showers today, scattered rain tomorrow. Westland and Fiordland, scattered rain in Westland, spreading elsewhere tomorrow. And for Rekohu, the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, the odd shower, and then rain tomorrow night. It's 9 minutes past 6. I'll update you with the latest news headlines at 6:30.
Nā mihi iwi, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Australia's COVID cases and death rates have been among the highest in the world per capita during the past week. More than 11,000 people have died since the pandemic began, 486 in the past week. The numbers are getting worse as the country heads towards the peak of the 3rd wave of the pandemic. The ABC's Annie Guest reports.
There had been high hopes that 2022 might start to see an end to the pandemic. But Professor Mike Toole from the Burnett Institute says that's a long way from reality.
So we're in probably the worst phase of the pandemic. 95% of reported COVID cases have been reported this year, 2022.
The epidemiologist has studied the latest international COVID statistics where, per capita, Australia has some of the highest numbers.
But in the past 7 days, Australia has ranked number 3 for cases per million population. Now, that excludes some very tiny islands, like the Channel Islands and a few other small places. And the same for deaths. We rank number 3 for deaths per capita, so much higher than, say, the US, UK, France, Germany. If you look at other countries, a number of countries in Europe still have stronger mask mandates than Australia, and also they have a lot higher compliance.
Australia does mandate masks in high-risk settings, such as aged care, hospitals and public transport. Professor Toole says it's not enough, pointing to a Burnett Institute study that showed mask wearing doubled when Victoria first made them compulsory in 2020.
The messaging out there is very, very confusing.
He says Australians are not getting clear signals on mask wearing and other precautionary measures.
Strong public health messaging that if you have lighter symptoms, do a RAT test. If it's negative, go out and get a PCR test. The other thing they must do is get boosters. 2 doses is not enough.
The Chief Medical Officer, Professor Paul Kelly, released a statement saying the advice is clear for people to wear masks in crowded indoor environments beyond their homes. Queensland has Australia's second highest number of people in hospital with COVID, more than 1,000, and a Health Department spokesman told AM the state does have coordinated and effective public health messaging. Kylie Ward is the CEO of the Australian College of Nursing.
I'm really concerned about the nursing profession and the health profession in general. It's not only their physical health, but it's their emotional and mental health and wellbeing that I'm concerned about.
She's appealing to the community for empathy for health workers.
Please understand the pressure that the profession's under. Be patient, be kind, and wear masks, wash hands, and look after themselves and each other.
Kylie Ward from the Australian College of Nursing, ending that report from Annie Guest. Meanwhile, there were 6,910 new community cases of COVID-19 and 16 deaths here today. As more US states move to ban abortion, potentially life-threatening complications are emerging. In Texas, some women who have had miscarriages say doctors are denying the care they need because of the strict anti-abortion law passed in that state last year. Here's CNN's Elizabeth Cowan with one woman's story.
Marlene Estelle and A.D. De Silva have always wanted a little brother or sister for their daughter, Adelina. Instead, what they got was a nightmare because of a Texas anti-abortion law.
I get so angry that I was treated this way because of laws that were passed that by men who have never been pregnant and never will be.
Estelle's nightmare started out as a dream come true. After months of trying, she became pregnant late last summer.
We were super excited because we didn't think I could get pregnant.
An ultrasound at 7.5 weeks showed all was well. But at an ultrasound 2 weeks later,
she said there is no heartbeat, there is no viable pregnancy.
Estelle asked her doctor for a standard treatment, a surgery to remove the fetal remains. She says her doctor refused. That surgery, commonly known as a D&C, is the same procedure used to abort a living fetus.
She said, well, because of the new law that's passed, you're going to have to get another ultrasound for me to be able to even do anything for you.
Overwhelmed emotionally and physically.
The pain would get so severe it would be hard to walk.
She went to get a second invasive ultrasound at an imaging center, describing it later in a YouTube video.
Someone shoves a wand in my sensitive area and tells me, hey, you lost your baby again. I shouldn't have to go through that twice.
So you had to hear it twice that you lost a baby.
It's gut-wrenching. Sorry.
That's okay.
Because you already know what you're going to see. It's just like seeing it twice, being told that you're not going to be a mom.
Even after that second ultrasound, would your obstetrician give you the surgical procedure?
No. No.
Estelle had to go get yet another ultrasound showing her dead fetus. So you were walking around carrying a dead fetus?
And just emotionally carrying it around and just knowing that there's nothing you could do, it just feels very, it's like I can't grieve or move past it because I'm just walking around carrying it.
Dr. Lillian Shapiro has been an OBGYN in Atlanta for more than 30 years. When a woman is walking around with a dead fetus for weeks because she can't get a surgical procedure, what's the danger to her?
She can develop an infection that can make her sterile and never able to have children again.
Or even worse,
when the baby dies inside, the baby starts to release parts of its tissue that can get into the mother's blood supply. It can cause organ failure. It can cause death.
It is 16 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's being called a pilgrimage of penance. Pope Francis has arrived in Canada to offer a formal apology on Canadian soil to thousands of Indigenous survivors of abuse inflicted at schools that were run by Roman Catholic churches. The BBC's David Lewis has more.
Starting in the 1800s, 150,000 Indigenous children were taken from their homes across Canada and forced to attend residential Roman Catholic schools. Many of them suffered sexual and physical abuse, and resettlement was all done in the name of cultural assimilation. In 2015, Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission called the practice cultural genocide. These schools, the majority of which were run by the Roman Catholic Church, were operating right up until the 1990s. Isidore Poorman is a survivor of one of these education centres. He returned to the school to tell the BBC what he remembered about life when he was there.
6 years old, I was imprisoned here. The boys would all be around giggling or trying to go to sleep and tell them to go to bed. But then when just one boy would start off a cry, it'll make us all cry. It was a lonesome cry. I got hit like everybody else that spoke the language here, called dirty little savages.
The Pope made a formal apology back in April. He described the conduct of Roman Catholics who took part as deplorable and asked for God's forgiveness. He said he was sorry from the bottom of his heart. This week, the Pontiff's itinerary includes visits to Alberta and Quebec provinces and the Northern Territory of Nunavut. However, there is no plan to stop off in British Columbia, where the discovery last summer of evidence of some 200 unmarked graves on the grounds of a former residential school led to shock and outrage across the country. Hundreds more unmarked graves have since also been found at other residential schools. Joy Spearchief Morris is an Indigenous Canadian writer and journalist. Her mother was forced to go to a Catholic residential school, and other relatives were sent to schools run by the Anglican Church. She says the Pope's visit is dividing opinion.
It is a mixed bag in terms of what can be expected from the Pope's apology and the Pope's reception in Canada. There are a lot of Indigenous people in a lot of Indigenous communities that have a lot of anger towards the Catholic Church and are not interested in an apology. For them, they would rather see, the Catholic Church be held accountable and justice for the harms and abuse that was had.
Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has begun a diplomatic charm offensive in Africa. He's dismissed claims that Moscow is to blame for the global food crisis. Many African countries are reliant on Ukrainian grain supplies, and some are facing food shortages right now. Russia has defended its missile attack on the Ukrainian port of Odessa, which happened a day after Moscow signed a deal to unblock shipments of grain through the Black Sea. Here's the BBC's James Waterhouse from the south of Ukraine.
People are starving, but it's getting spoilt here.
Vladimir summing up Ukraine's grain problem. His is some of the 20 million tonnes trapped in the country. This is the Odessa region. Around 4,000 farmers work these fields, more than anywhere else in the country, and they're all struggling.
All of this made the situation for the farmers very hard, even unbearable. I am 72 years old, and in over 70 years, I don't remember such a difficult year like this one.
It's hoped a grain deal involving Ukraine and Russia will see 5 million tonnes shifted every month through the Black Sea, a pre-war level. Because it can't stay here. Farmers like Volodymyr need this agreement to work for their livelihoods. Ukraine needs it to work for its economy, and tens of millions of people around the world need it to work to survive. And it is those forces which are keeping this deal going for now. It couldn't be more fragile. Moscow's released this footage, admitting to launching a missile attack on the port of Odessa yesterday, a day after agreeing to leave it alone. It claims a military ship and a warehouse full of Western-supplied missiles were the targets. The Kremlin's likely defence is that by doing so, it didn't violate the deal. And how's this for a charm offensive? Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov meeting his opposite number in Egypt, one of Ukraine's biggest grain customers. He's trying to build support across Africa as his country battles anger and sanctions over the war in Ukraine.
The food crisis didn't start yesterday or in February. It started with the pandemic because of serious mistakes that Western states made regarding food and energy.
Regardless of blame, if Vladimir doesn't sell his grain, there won't be a next harvest.
A Republican face-off in Arizona could foreshadow the 2024 presidential race. The state's upcoming primary for governor has quickly morphed into a bitter proxy war between former President Donald Trump and former Vice President Mike Pence. Here's CNN's Kyung La.
A showdown in the desert over the future of the Republican Party. Mike Pence and Donald Trump at odds yet again, this time in the hotly contested GOP primary for Arizona governor. The former president has endorsed Republican candidate Kari Lake.
She is my complete and total endorsement.
A former Republican.
I registered as a Republican.
Turned independent.
I was really fed up.
Turned Democrat.
I registered as a Democrat.
Turned Republican again.
The Republican Party, party of solutions.
Her campaign is centered on the lie that Donald Trump beat Joe Biden.
We may not be able to save the whole U.S. as long as that illegitimate president's in the White House.
She spouts far-right conspiracies.
We had major election fraud. 200,000 minimum ballots were trafficked by mules. I'm Kari Lake.
Like Trump, Lake made her name on television. The former Arizona local news anchor has also borrowed from his playbook, frequently attacking those in her old profession.
Fake news here, by the way. I got ambushed by CNN outside.
I think Kari Lake has what it takes to get us to where we need to get back on track for our families and gives us hope.
Lake has a message for a base and only that group. The question is that group large enough to win the Republican nomination?
How are you? Republican gubernatorial candidate Karen Taylor Robeson, another leading contender for the GOP nomination, says it's not.
How do you run against an opponent who is backed by a popular former president?
If you like Donald Trump's policies and record of limited government, low tax, pro-business environment, and somebody with a track record of success, I'm your candidate. If you want somebody who is a big personality, then Kari Lake is your candidate.
Robeson's strategy to win the GOP nomination is to consolidate support of traditional conservatives, helped by Pence's Friday rally.
Arizona needs Karen Taylor Robeson.
Robeson also has the support of Arizona's outgoing Republican Governor Doug Ducey, who attacked Lake's support for Trump as a matter of political convenience.
Kari Lake's misleading voters with no evidence. She's been tagged by her opponents with the nickname Fake Lake, which seems to be sticking.
Thank you. A delicate dance for Robeson. Courting the right wing means sowing doubts about the 2020 election.
Where are you on the 2020 election?
At a minimum, the election was not fair. And I know people want to hear a different answer from me. But when you take a look at, there was concern from a lot of voters.
When you look at the primaries we just went through and some of these other states, I think messages to take away from that are certainly the Donald Trump endorsement is a powerful asset, but it's not the silver bullet.
Arizona's primary will be another signal for national Republicans.
One of the most memorable news stories in recent years was the rescue of 12 young Thai footballers and their coach, who were trapped for 18 days in a flooded cave. Now, a movie based on those events has been made. The BBC's Jonathan Head reported from the cave throughout the rescue, and he's been back to talk to some of those who were involved.
An afternoon training session in the northern border town of Mesai. Among these budding young footballers are two survivors of an epic drama that unfolded here 4 years ago.
How many of you? 13? Brilliant.
The stunning discovery of 12 boys and their coach, trapped for 9 days deep inside a flooded cave, captivated the world. Titan was the youngest of those boys, then 11 years old. Today, he still practices with Ek, the coach who helped them all get through their ordeal. Their story has now been taken up by Hollywood.
Last seen 9 days ago, 12 boys and their coach are trapped in the flooded caves. Hello? Hey, you're here.
I was one of dozens of reporters covering the trapped football team, crisscrossing the mountains above the cave, never knowing how it would all end.
When I first walked up here 4 years ago and saw the row of bicycles up against these railings belonging to boys the same age as my own sons, I remember the heavy feeling I had then, how unlikely it was they'd ever come out alive. What I witnessed in the days after that was one of the most extraordinary stories I've ever covered and one of the most remarkable rescues of all time.
Yeah, the boys took this route. On the day they went in, it was dry all the way to wherever they got to.
Yeah.
So it just happened over
the water moves
a few hours.
So unpredictably, doesn't it?
A few hours. So not long.
British caver Vern Unsworth has spent a decade exploring Tam Luang Cave. He played a critical role in getting the world's best cave divers to come and lead the high-risk rescue operation.
You know, when you have to sedate the children to get them out, and it's a 2.5, 3 hour dive, then they obviously expected casualties.
I mean, it had never been done before, had it?
No, no.
Nothing like it?
Nothing like it.
How does it feel to be a celebrity? you're going to be in a Hollywood movie. You're going to be everywhere.
I don't regard myself as any sort of celebrity. You know, we did a job to bring the boys out, and we gave the boys the best chance, and that's what it's all about. Celebrity status doesn't come into it.
The boys have grown up now, some moving away from Mesai. Titan hopes to become a professional player. He's already had to learn how to deal with his unexpected fame.
At first, it was very difficult. I had to adjust myself because a lot of people knew about me. I didn't know how to act then, and I felt tense when I was in front of a camera or being interviewed. But I got used to it now, and I know how I'm supposed to behave.
The events that took place in these mountains still have the power to amaze and inspire. The tragic death of one diving volunteer during the rescue doesn't take away from the miraculous achievement of bringing all 12 boys and their coach out unharmed.
Right, some of your feedback now on the protest that involved Brian Tamaki and the people who walked onto Auckland's motorway. This person says the Newmarket Business Association needs to take a civil case against Brian Tamaki. Today, I think the last word goes to this Air New Zealand customer who sent us a delightful email. Now, much of this email is in the grammar and punctuation, so do bear with us while I read it to you. I was asked to call Air New Zealand because there was a change in my flights in September. I really didn't want to because I know they'd waste my life with their appalling wait times. I waited 1 hour, 23 minutes to be told that my flight had changed by 10 minutes. Shouty capitals, followed by 4 exclamation marks and 4 question marks. Jesus, seriously? 5 question marks. They had my email. They need to get smarter. 2 exclamation marks. Utter nonsense, says this Air New Zealand customer. Wow, that's about all we've got time for this evening. The late news team's going to keep you updated throughout the night. Remember, if you missed anything from the show, you can always find Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts from. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō. Tomorrow from 5 a.m, First Up's going to speak to another school principal who is at his wit's end over staffing shortages. Kaua e wariwari te atatero I a mātou kōrero. Don't forget to check out our videos and stories online.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. The Prime Minister is warning foot and mouth disease from Indonesia would devastate the national herd if it reaches New Zealand and put 100,000 primary sector jobs at risk. Canterbury is the country's COVID epicentre, with 1 in every 5 current hospitalisation cases there. The government says it will listen to a cry for help sent by 10 senior school principals. And Air New Zealand is going on a recruiting drive as it struggles through winter demand. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
This morning on First Up, we spoke with vaccinologist Helen Pertussis-Harris, who says people need to prepare for an onslaught of not just COVID, but other infectious diseases.
What the viruses can do is also make you more susceptible to some of those really nasty bacterial infections. The pneumococcal disease is one, meningococcal disease is another.
And you thought that Auckland mayoral candidate Leo Malloy was friends with the Tamakis? Well, he's not.
I'm friends with Hannah. I know Brian. I've been half a dozen times. I've been to their house once. But to say I'm friends with Brian would suggest or imply that I have some sort of